A former MSNBC producer has spilled the beans on the network's Andrew Yang blackout. Now, this is something you could really apply to several candidates. Bernie Sanders, of course, Marianne Williamson, another one that was pretty much given no coverage, at least at the beginning of the primary. But this producer that I'll get to in a second has basically discussed how, if you noticed how our network wasn't talking about Andrew Yang, there was a reason for that. First up, I'm going to show you this. This is put together by Scott Santons. This is fantastic breakdown. Again, when I cut this out of the live stream, it'll be below the video in the description box, but this is a breakdown of many examples of them basically just leaving Yang out of the discussion. Here's a list of candidates that Yang was not a part of. Again, Yang cut out of this list. Here as well, even though he had already announced. Here as well. And in fact, I think Bernie Sanders was left out of one of these as well. Yeah, left off this one. So they left off Bernie Sanders and Andrew Yang. But anyways, he goes on. There's many more examples here. But let me show you what recently came out from former MSNBC producer Ariana Picari, saying, actually, I just reviewed my journal on April 25th, 2019. I was told that we were never to pursue Andrew for an interview on our show, along with several others. I wonder who those are. The list of candidates was dictated, but the reasons for allowing them or not were not explained. Now, obviously, I don't know what the reasoning would be, especially, Andrew Yang isn't a socialist. He's not anti-corporate. So it is kind of weird to leave him off the list compared to someone, say, like Bernie Sanders or even Marianne Williamson, who's a lot more critical of the capitalist system. But with that said, clearly he was somebody who was an outsider. He wasn't part of the club. So he was somebody here who was purposely pushed off the air. And the media had their own reasons, whatever they were, but had their reasons to push Andrew off the air. And some other replies to this. Josh Fox here, who was the director of Gasland, Oscar-nominated film. He says here, I was told explicitly by some folks who work for your network that there was, quote, no-fly list. Or sorry, that there was a no-fly list. I was also told explicitly by people who work for your network that there was one, and I was on it. So he was told both that there was no no-fly list, and people that told him that there actually were people who were banned off the network. And he was part of it. He hasn't been on MSNBC since 2016 when he became a Bernie Sanders surrogate. And this is something I've noticed as well. Josh Fox was on the network quite a bit, actually, before 2016. Since becoming a Bernie Sanders supporter, kicked off the network completely. And again, it's a club of people who are wealthy, who have a certain worldview about capitalism. And if you buck that trend, unless you're somebody like a politician, Bernie Sanders, they can't simply ignore him. MSNBC still has Bernie Sanders on. But when it comes to people who are supporters of that and who maybe are a little less restrained because they aren't a politician, like someone like a Josh Fox, then absolutely they ban people from the network. And the same is with, there's several people. Cenk Uygur, also banned from MSNBC because he used to be a host there, and then he left because he didn't want to abide by their rules, and he's spoken out against MSNBC since then, and has not been brought back on. And even CNN, Chris Cuomo over the past, I guess during the primary, had Cenk on occasionally, but really it is incredibly rare to see any of these major progressive or left-wing voices that you see on the internet. It is so rare to see them on television. Meanwhile, Fox News, they have on idiots like Dave Rubin all the time. Ben Shapiro all the time. They always bring these people on. But MSNBC, the idea that they are, the left-wing network is completely insane. It is a network of the Democratic Party establishment. And if you criticize that, if you are critical of what the party has done or critical of the direction they are going in, you will be put onto a list where you're not invited on the show. Marianne Williamson also chimed in here saying the political/media industrial complex had a pre-prescribed conversation and a pre-prescribed list of people they were willing to allow into the conversation. What voters were presented with was an illusion of choice. I think this is 100% on point. To be super fair, though, here, Ali Velshi does push back a little bit. So this was to Andrew Yang had on this producer, Ariana, on his show to discuss a lot of this. Ali Velshi, I guess, was quoted in the initial tweet. So he replied saying, "Is there something about my journalism with which you are concerned specifically? You are aware that I've interviewed Andrew Yang early and a couple times, and but for the fact that he signed with CNN, I would have done so more frequently." So I will say Ali Velshi is maybe the only host on MSNBC I actually trust. He's also Canadian, so has a different perspective than most. But during the Black Lives Matter protests, for example, he was out there in the field. He discussed how the police were the ones that initiated the violence when he was out there. So he's been very, his reporting has actually been objective, has been fair, and he has had on people like Bernie Sanders to discuss Medicare for all, for example. Again, he is a Canadian, understands that single-payer healthcare is not a crazy idea, and that every other major nation has some form of universal healthcare. So I'm not sure, how far this directive about banning Andrew Yang went, but he appears to not have been a part of it. But Ariana, the producer, Bakari, replied saying, "I also admire Ali Velshi. Based on my experience, he's incredibly smart and dedicated and strives for fairness. I enjoyed working with him whenever he hosted The Last Word." So there you go. Ali Velshi is also respected at the network. One last thing here, though. This is not, in the past either. This is ongoing in terms of these bans, in terms of certain topics that these networks don't want to talk about. I recently covered how Jamal Bowman, he was on CNN ripping Rahm Emanuel apart, and then his feed just drops at the beginning of the conversation. And at the time when I reported this, it was weird, obviously. I mentioned how it was odd, though at the same time, it didn't make sense to me, as they've had on people before that have been critical of the Democratic Party establishment, but Rahm Emanuel maybe is somebody who's off limits, and it's possible Jamal Bowman actually was purposely kicked off, because later on that same day, Jamal Bowman came out and tweeted this: "The revolution will not be televised." Just out of the blue, just tweeted this out after he was kicked off CNN. And by the way, it is not even just that he was kicked off, it's that they didn't have him back on. So usually if somebody loses connection during one of these media hits, they'll have that person back on in the next segment or sometime that day to have that discussion. Well, they never had Jamal Bowman back on the show, or any show on CNN. So absolutely, this kind of behavior goes on, and it can even be as blatant as kicking somebody off in the middle of their media hit.